Good evening, everybody, and welcome into another live stream of the New England Sports Weekly podcast. Or if you are joining me on your walk, your jog, if it was today, it would have been a nice day to be out there on a jog. It was 56, almost 60 something degrees around here. So that is balmy tropical temperatures for this time of year. But no matter if you're listening live or listening to the podcast, we appreciate the listenership, no matter how you decided to tune in, as it is kind of that weird spot in the sports season where the NFL season is done. There's not a lot of hockey, not a lot of basketball going on because the NBA just had their All-Star break. The NHL had a little bit of a lull here, so it's kind of been a little, I wouldn't say slow, because there definitely has been news, so that hasn't stopped. And of course, baseball's going on through its whole arbitration hearings, and not arbitration, but their whole CBA collective bargaining agreement right now. So there's plenty to talk about. So it might not be action that we're going to get into here. There's a little bit with hockey, but a lot of it's kind of off-season news or getting ready for the second half or the stretch run in the NBA or in the NHL. So we definitely have some news to get to here as we move along, and we'll get to the out of the box segment now. As the New England Patriots and the rest of the NFL are into not salary cap season. I always want to call it salary cap season, but it is franchise tag season, at least for the next two weeks. NFL teams have until March 8th to sign any of their restricted free agents to a franchise tag. And that is big news for the New England Patriots, because your number one corner and arguably top 10 corner in the league, depending on your thoughts of how he's played over the last couple of years, J.C. Jackson is in that category. He is up. Well, he's not restricted, I should say. He is a unrestricted free agent, but he is one of those players that your team has an option to use one player for the franchise tag. And of course, with how important J.C. Jackson is, there's been a lot of talk as far as if the Patriots will franchise tag him or not, what the future will hold for JC and the Patriots. We will definitely crack into that one here soon as far as JC is concerned. But that's the big news there for the New England Patriots as far as what's going to happen with JC Jackson. And of course, as we get closer to the next 3 weeks as well, when the new league year starts, we'll get closer to that legal tampering period, which is an oxymoron in itself. But anyways, the legal tampering period will start here 2 days before free agency. I believe free agency is like March 15th, somewhere between the 15th to the 17th, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the New England Patriots we'll see if they dabble in that free agent market like they did last year. I'm not sure if they'll go as deep into the pool as they did last year, but we'll see if they do as we get closer and closer to that. And with the Boston Bruins, they did take down the Colorado Avalanche 5-1, a resounding win over one of the better teams in the West in Colorado. So that was definitely a signature win for the Boston Bruins to take down Colorado. And of course, we did get the news that obviously Brad Marchand's suspension was not shortened by any means, but he was supposed to be back, but now he is gone for at least one game here with a personal situation for the time being. And the Bruins will be without him, but they do have Patrice Bergeron back. So their lines are starting to get back to normalcy here, as we mentioned, we have Bergeron and Pasternak at least playing together for a little bit here. So we'll see if they put when Marchand comes back, if they'll slide Pasta back down to that second line like they have before when they were able to spread out the scoring. We'll see if that works here, to see if Cassidy in the front office wants to go back to that situation. Hopefully they do. It worked pretty well for the Boston Bruins. But as you mentioned, the big news here, as we mentioned before, they got Marchand back, is that they brought down the Colorado Avalanche, who are the top seed in the Western Conference at this point in time at 36-10. So that was a big victory for your Boston Bruins as they continue their West Coast swing. As tomorrow night they will be taking on the Seattle Kraken, the first ever visit to Seattle, to what some people have affectionately called the Crack House. So we'll see how. I can't believe. I still can't believe some of the things that people are getting away with the Seattle Kraken and the nicknames that are out there, but it does make you laugh. So we'll see how that all goes for your Boston Bruins. And of course, we will be looking at not technically the second half, because it's probably the last third of the season for the Boston Celtics as they come off the All-Star break. They will be facing the Brooklyn Nets. And of course, Brooklyn, when they're healthy, when they have everything going. And of course, now that they traded away Harden, but they did gain Ben Simmons, that'll be interesting to see how the makeup of that team goes. So that we'll preview this second/last third of the season for your Boston Bruins, and also get into the Major League Baseball negotiations, if you want to call them that, as they have met for 4 hours as well today. How productive was it? Not sure how productive it was, as though there were reports that baseball is prepared to cancel regular season games now. So it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. You cancel spring training games. Saw that one coming. And now it's all right. We're going to put an artificial deadline to February 28th. And if we can't get anything done by then, regular season games are going to be canceled. Oh, it's so fun being an Major League Baseball fan right now. Just gag me. Ugh. It just sickens me. But we will talk about those lack of discussions later on here in the show. But as we mentioned, off the top of the broadcast, the big story, at least for the New England Patriots, is that we are now into franchise tag season. They have 2 weeks to get JC Jackson signed to the franchise tag, or else he becomes a unrestricted free agent where anybody can sign him. Now, I don't think this is going to be a situation where a la Dante Hightower, Devin McCourty, Julian Edelman, Wes Welker was a little bit different, but of course, those are the 3 big ones everybody brings up every time. But I don't think it would be in that type of situation with a Hightower, an Edelman, or a McCourty, one of those situations where you're good players, but you're not top of the heap, top of the market, top 10 at your position. Although you could argue, if you want to get into with Devin McCourty, when he was a free agent, I think he was undervalued. I think when he was in his prime, now is a different story. It's a different situation with Devin McCourty. But back in his prime, McCourty, you could make the argument that he might have been a top 10 safety in this league. And then with Julian Edelman as a slot receiver, there were few that were better than he was back in his prime. Now, of course, his prime wasn't as long as some others, but still, Julian Edelman he went out and tested the free agent waters. All of these players, the Hightowers, the McCourties, the Edelmans, all had different situations, but were key cogs to the Patriots. Belichick in the front office said, basically, you go out, you see if you can get a better deal, but remember, come back here because we'd love to have you back. In some of those instances, Hightower was the one that seemed like I think he had I don't know, better offer, but he had a pretty lucrative offer from the Jets, if I remember, or Steelers, one of the two, if I remember correctly. But he ended up turning that down, came back here to New England. Edelman and McCourty, it was not what they expected out in free agency, so they ended up coming back. And of course, rest is history with those players after their rookie deals ran out. But JC Jackson, totally different boat here, totally different situation. He is a top 10 corner. Where you want to slot him in the top 5 or in the top 10, wherever you want to put him, however you want to, whatever your matrix or measuring system is for JC Jackson. Either way you slice it, he's a top 10 corner in my book. And of course, this is not the same type of day and age where you have an absolute shutdown corner. You can't even, honestly, there's no true shutdown corner in the NFL now. I think back in 2018, you could put that tag on Stephon Gilmore and Jalen Ramsey. And of course, not JC Jackson, but Stephon Gilmore. He's getting a little up there in the age, getting a little long in the tooth. He's not the same he used to be, but still very effective corner. Jalen Ramsey, I'm not sure. There was a time when it was Stephon Gilmore, Tre'Davious White. Those are the three that you could all throw in that bag. And the only reason I'm probably leaving Tre'Davious White out at this point is he might arguably be one of the closest to a shutdown that we have left in the league. But obviously he's injured, so you kind of put him to the side at the moment. But as far as last year, I mean, obviously Jalen Ramsey is an all-pro. He's a great player, and I'm not saying anything against him. I'm just saying the days of Darrelle Revis, Ty Law, and even 2018 Stephon Gilmore, that year and a half, almost 2 years that he had that run where nobody could throw at him. You'd absolutely lock him down. Those days of Darrelle Revis, his days with the Jets, and back in 2014 here in New England, those days, they're not gone, because you're going to have spurts from these corners where maybe a 3, 4, 5 year run where they're very dominant. But to me, I don't see one of those corners out there right now that absolutely positively is a Darrelle Revis in his prime to throw out the Revis Island, where you can throw him out on an island or you can put him out by himself. You don't have safety help a majority of the time because you roll that safety to your secondary, the secondary receiver or the slot receiver, wherever you need help, or in the run support. To me, there isn't one of those corners out there right now that is still playing at that high of a level. Like I said, Jalen Ramsey's still all pro. So he's still very good, but he just didn't look the same in the Super Bowl, to be honest. So again, what this means for the discussion for JC Jackson is that he right now, with probably the lack of a true number one shutdown, absolutely, you're not going to get anything past me type of corner. JC Jackson is the modern day NFL corner where he stifles you enough where he keeps you from getting those huge plays, unless you're Stephon Diggs, which that's been his bugaboo over the last couple of years, is Stephon Diggs. But in all honesty, though, he's one of those corners where as long as you give up maybe 30, 40, 50 yards in the game, you don't give up the touchdown, you give up maybe 3, 4 catches or less, where you're not allowing them to be really productive. You're allowing them maybe to move the chains once or twice here or there, but you're not giving up those huge chunk plays or giving up the touchdowns. And of course, JC Jackson changed his name in the middle of the season to Mr. INT, and he does get a lot of picks. Ended up with 8 picks this year, which was good for, I believe, second in the NFL, right behind Trayvon Diggs of the Cowboys, which I think Trayvon Diggs is a little overrated just because he had 13 picks, 14 picks on the year. So somewhere between 10 to 14 picks on the year. And honestly, he gave up. I'm not huge into the football analytics statistics portion of it, but even just watching games, and it does kind of back up those analytics, those stats, where you would see Trayvon Diggs, yes, he was a ball hawking corner, but he would give up a lot of yardage, a lot of receptions, where, you're getting turnovers, which is great, but along with those turnovers, can you at least from time to time shut these guys down? And he doesn't do that as much as JC Jackson does. So JC Jackson will get a lot of picks, but he also, yes, he will occasionally get burned by a Stephon Diggs or the top tier wide receiver, but he still plays well enough. He still plays well above average. He's very good, where to the point where he will have some games where he'll shut a guy down, but or even in a game where he's not giving up the gigantic plays. And like I said, unless there are a few of those occasions. But other than that, JC Jackson is, like I said, he belongs in the conversation of top 10 corner. And where that all comes back here to New England for the Patriots is that your cupboard is bare as far as what you have left at corner after JC Jackson. You brought in Jalen Mills from Philadelphia in free agency last year. He was at times your second corner. Now, he didn't play as bad as I thought he was because he got absolutely torched in Philly and never. And he was one of those guys that just seemed like he was going to be a draft bust. And he kind of turned himself around a little bit in Philly, but it still would have times where he gets torched. So you're just like, when the Patriots ended up giving him all that money in free agency, I was really leery about what his production was going to be. Like maybe if you play him in the slot, although you have Jonathan Jones, who ended up actually getting hurt. But really, though, there wasn't a lot to kind of be optimistic with him, because just watching Mills out there, I never felt like, okay, this is going to be a number one corner. I didn't even like him as a number two. I thought maybe as your third guy, as kind of your Swiss Army knife in the back end of the defense, where you can move around in the slot. If you have to play him on the outside, you can. You don't want to do it a lot. Or if you have to play maybe a little bit of free safety out there, you could do that. But he honestly played better than I thought he was going to play. He still had his times where you were left scratching your head, but that wasn't as much as I thought it was going to be for Jalen Mills. But still, though, if JC Jackson walks out the door, doesn't come back, then you're left with Jonathan Jones, who is a great slot corner. I wouldn't want to put him out on the outside because that's where he gets exposed. We've seen that in the past. He's a great slot corner, one of the best in the league as a slot, but he's not an outside guy. He's not going to be able to, he's smaller, so he's not going to be able to cover the bigger guys that you're going to play. And after that, like I said, it's Jonathan Jones who's your slot, and then Jalen Mills. Those are the only ones that are competent. And I kind of use that term loosely, especially with Jalen Mills. I obviously, like I said, Jonathan Jones, if he's in the slot, leave him there. I feel confident. But after that, it's just kind of, do you want to see Miles Bryant out there? He looked absolutely lost. He got absolutely torched in back-to-back games against the Buffalo Bills. The last regular season game against Buffalo at the day after Christmas. And then, of course, that playoff game in Buffalo. Miles Bryant just absolutely got his boobs ripped off. It was just ugly, 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 ugly. So I don't want to see Brian out there on that football field unless it's an emergency situation or is your fifth corner. Y- That's real. I really don't want to see him out there. Jawan Williams, he's just been a bust. Another one of those second round guys where you thought maybe he's a bigger corner. You could maybe even move him over to safety if you did, but he just hasn't found a home here, and he just another one of those second round secondary guys that the Patriots haven't been able to get much out of over Belichick's last 6-7 years here of drafting. And now Kyle Duggar seems to be the one that has broken that mold, but Jawan Johnson just has, Jawan Williams, excuse me, just hasn't really broken out, and you're just waiting and waiting, and nothing's happening, and so you can't just you can't rely on that. So in this situation, the Patriots are really backed into a corner as far as what you do with J.C. Jackson because you don't want to let him walk, you don't want to let him go. Because after that, I really don't like the free agent market because after J.C. Jackson, it's Carlton Davis, who was the quote unquote number one corner for Tampa. Really wasn't that great. I really was not impressed by Carlton Davis. I mean, he got lifted up by that front seven that the Bucks had, that great front seven they have. But after that, it was meh. I really didn't like Carlton Davis. And then the other option, the other top tier really would be Stephon Gilmore. And we all know Stephon Gilmore isn't going to come back here, at least unless they really back up the Brinks truck. But if they didn't do it the first time, if they didn't do it, well, they did it the first time, got them $65 million. But unless they're basically going to do it a second time here, which they weren't willing to do this off or last off season and during training camp, then really, I don't think it's going to happen this time. So you absolutely have to do everything in your power to bring JC Jackson back. Now, of course, the fantasy football Madden player in me, the daydreamer, would love to take that money that you have and spend it on a Chris Godwin. Obviously, Devontae Adams is who I would love, but I just don't. Obviously, I don't see them going that far or using that much money on a top tier wide receiver. And kind of looking into the pool, the one that I do have a little bit of interest in is Casey Hayward. So Casey Hayward, who played with Vegas, he's been around here for a little bit, but to me, Casey Hayward he's a solid veteran that if you bring him in, I don't think obviously if he's your number one, you're in trouble, to be honest. But if you bring him in, if you re-sign J.C. Jackson, you bring in Casey Hayward on a lower end deal, maybe a 1-year prove it deal, I would like that. But as far as J.C. Jackson, though, he has to be the number one priority. And trust me, as far as your free agency pool is concerned, I still think in the draft, which we'll talk about here in a moment, I would love to see them go wide receiver. But as far as your free agency, you're going to be absolutely screwed in that secondary. Where yes, you have Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips, but there's your middle. On your outside, you're going to get burned and absolutely torched on the outside if you don't have at least one good corner, because you can with a second corner you can at least try to duct tape it together and keep things going, scheme it up on that second corner. But if we're talking about Jalen Mills and Miles Bryant and then Jonathan Jones, like I said, Jonathan Jones, I want to keep him in the slot. I don't want to have him on the outside. if those are your top corners, then you're porked. You're absolutely porked. So this is where here comes the debate of, do you franchise him or do you try to work out the long-term deal? I am not in favor of the franchise tag, either outright franchising him, having him on a 1-year deal, and also playing the franchise, tag him, and then try to work out a long-term deal, because that just, to me, those deals never work out when you try to franchise somebody and try to come out with a long-term deal. It always seems like the player, yes, they get that big bag of money. Like if JC Jackson signs his franchise tag, it's $17 million guaranteed that he gets, and that hits the cap at 17. So obviously he's going to get a huge payday if he gets the cap as far as a 1-year payday, but he's looking for that long-term deal. And players hate that franchise tag because, okay, what happens if I get hurt here? It's not like you voluntarily signed a 1-year prove it. You were tagged by your team, and now you're going to get screwed if you get hurt or something happens, or if you have a down year. So for JC Jackson, I just don't think that's going to happen. And of course, JC Jackson, with the comments that he made to NBC Sports Boston, specifically to Phil Perry, who does a great job covering the team. He got some interesting comments from JC, as basically JC Jackson told him that basically he felt like the Patriots, maybe not that they didn't want him, but do they want him? Do they want to bring him back? He just kind of feels neglected at this point. He's kind of getting antsy. So it is interesting with the comments that he made here. And give me just a second. I'm just trying to pull them up, but you kind of catch the drift here as far as what happened, or what's going on with JC Jackson. It's pretty much just kind of been, he's frustrated with his situation. He wants to get his money, and he just feels like, oh, are the Patriots going to sign me? Are they going to bring me back? Do they really want me? He basically doesn't feel the love that he's getting from New England. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. But to me, I just don't see I just don't see how this would end well if you try to sign him to that tag. Okay, so this is the exact quote. It's, I guess they feel like they don't need me. I guess I can't be that important to them. I know I am, but they're not showing me. So yeah, basically I kind of danced around it there for a second, but you catch the drift. He wants his money, but Belichick plays hardball. He plays that slow dance. And honestly, though, if you want to look at it in a positive, corner is the one place that he will back up the Brinks truck, to kind of throw out that overused phrase, but Belichick has done that for corners. He did it on that. It really was a 1-year deal, but it was a 2-year deal for Darrelle Revis. Backloaded that second half, but he got his money. Stephon Gilmore was the highest paid corner for a couple of years. Got his 5 years, 65. Yeah, 5 years, 65. So he got bank on that. So of course, this is where I think Belichick, obviously, for his defenses, they've always had a number one corner. Go all the way back to Ty Law, throwing Asante Samuel until he left. And then you had Darrelle Revis, Stephon Gilmore, all of those championship teams that won a Super Bowl or made it to a Super Bowl. All of those elite or really good defenses had a number one. So this is where JC Jackson, where I said earlier, he may not be your Ty Law or Stephon Gilmore circa 2018, or Darrelle Revis in his prime. It's not, he might not be that, but he still is a number one corner. He's a legitimate number one corner, which I changed my tune because going into this past season, I thought he was a very good number two, and with Stephon Gilmore, that gives you a nice 1-2 punch. But now, to me, with J.C. Jackson, he's proven himself that he is a true number one. So this is where you have to, if you're Belichick, you have to bring him back. And obviously, if you put a gun to my head, proverbially, and you ask me, oh, what's going to happen? I think this is where they do sign him. I feel like they do, just because I feel like Belichick knows just how important having that corner in this day and age with all the high flying offenses are. So this is where I think he works out a long-term deal. Maybe he doesn't get the 17, 18 million dollars per year, but I think this is where maybe Belichick brings him in on 13, 14 million a year. So he's still getting a pretty high salary, and you bring him in or you re-sign him for 4 years, 5 years on that deal. And of course, with how things are looking for the NFL salary cap, it looks as though that's going to keep on climbing and climbing and climbing. So it could be a point where, all right, you're 17 against the cap, but now with everything expanding, we can afford to use money elsewhere. So I think when it comes to JC Jackson, just you have to make this your number one priority. You can't just let your secondary go into disarray as far as your corner position. That's probably in this day and age the most important position out on the field as far as defense is concerned, is having a good corner, at least one good corner. So I like I said, I think they will end up bringing him back. I just think at this point in time, J.C. Jackson is getting impatient. He wants his money, but I think he does appreciate being with the Patriots. I think this is a place that he does like, but he's also, when it comes to money, you got that mercenary type of mentality as far as, all right, I want my money, and I don't know if winning now that, because he's been on teams that have won a Super Bowl back in 2018. I think he was a rookie on that team, if I remember correctly. So he did get a Super Bowl ring that year. So I think this is kind of where he's at that point in the career, a la Jamie Collins, when he wanted all that money, where he was a good fit for New England, but he got traded away to Cleveland. He got his huge payday there. So I think J.C. Jackson, as much as he does like it here and all the things he said, he obviously, when it gets boiled down to the basics, money is the money. And I know it sounds obvious, but he really does, from all the things that you've kind of heard between the lines, you've heard him say to other people, it just sounds like, okay, I love it here, but that money is important for me this time. And so I think if he gets one of those deals that blows him away, that's why you can't let him reach free agency, and then you have to bid against these other teams, because if he gets out onto the market, then he's gone. But I think here in this 2-week period, in that franchise tag period, I think this is where I think they'll come to an agreement. I think they'll find a long-term solution to bring him back and keep him as your number one corner. So I do feel pretty good about that. Do I feel 100% that this is going to happen? No. I'm probably more on the 50-50 side of things. I know, 50-50, kind of wishy-washy, but still, I mean, better than I probably felt maybe towards the end of the season, where I thought, all right, maybe he might just walk, but I just don't think it's going to happen. And the Patriots can't afford to, because they have no depth there, and we'll see how that works for New England. So, kind of riffing off of J.C. Jackson and what the Patriots should do with that money. Now, let's, for the sake of discussion, say that J.C. Jackson, or not for if that he walks out the door, but what should the Patriots do with that money? Should they sign J.C. Jackson, or should they take that and get a top tier weapon? Now, of course, I changed my tune right after the season, after they got blown out, I got emotional and I was like, all right, this defense sucks. And trust me, they still need work. They still need to get young at that linebacker core. They still need to beef up that front seven. They still need to work to improve, obviously, get younger, definitely faster, more athletic in that middle of that defense. But I think in this day and age, you have to, absolutely have to have a good offense. You have to have that number one receiver along with that good quarterback to be a competitive team in the modern NFL. So that's where this is where it gets tricky because, like I said, you can't afford to lose J.C. Jackson, like I just said. So I would love, obviously, for them to get a Devontae Adams or a Chris Godwin. So I think Chris Godwin would be the more quote unquote realistic. I still don't think it's going to happen, but he'd be the more realistic one just because I just don't see Tom Brady obviously going back to Tampa Bay. They just have too many pending free agents, and just the things that have kind of come out here with he and Bruce Arians, where it sounded like Tom Brady and Byron Leftwich would make the plays, and then Arians would come in with his red pen and make all the marks. And I know Arians came out in a press conference and kind of made fun of it, but I don't see Brady going back there. The only place, if Brady ever, and I don't think Brady actually is coming back. I think we're all kind of falling for it here. But the only place I could see him come back if he ever did would be the San Francisco 49ers and go play for his hometown team where he grew up. He's from San Mateo, California. So, I mean, I still don't think it's that likely. Honestly, I'm not buying into the Brady actually coming out of retirement. I don't think he's going to be this generate. I don't think he's going to be Brett Favre and do this like 3 times. I don't think that's going to happen. But if he ever did, it would be San Fran. So Tampa Bay obviously is not going to be if Brady's gone, unless Tampa brings in. Not that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be a destination type of QB where you'd be flocking to go there. But, I mean, if you don't bring in a somewhat quality quarterback, you don't bring in a serviceable quarterback, then obviously these guys are going to be, especially Chris Godwin, who could put up the stats, could get the money, is going to probably go somewhere else. So I think Chris Godwin's more likely because even if Aaron Rodgers gets traded to Denver or gets traded to Pittsburgh, wherever he goes, I think that's where Devontae Adams is going to follow. Or even if he stays in Green Bay, I think he follows him there. Although Green Bay is not the best cap spot, so they kind of have to do some cap gymnastics to get him back on, to bring him back to the roster. So that would be kind of interesting to see how that would all work out. But honestly, though, I want to see them get that number one weapon, that top tier weapon this off season. But obviously, it's going to be difficult because you just spent all that money last year. Is Bill Belichick going to look at this where I take the approach of I just spent all this money on Aguilar, on Hunter Henry, Johnny Smith, Kendrick Bourne. Am I really going to go spend more money? Like Mac Jones had a pretty good year. Or do I want to just lean on this development? Which I don't think he should be thinking like that. I still think he should be looking to even improve. But by no means do I think this Patriots offense is the receiving core is horrible. It's not as bad as it was in 2019 after Edelman was injured. Or no, I'm sorry. I mean, Edelman was there. So, I mean, it wasn't as bad as 2019, 2020. Obviously, Edelman was there, but that was pretty much it in 2019. 2020, Edelman got hurt and Jacoby Myers emerged, but he wasn't lighting the scoreboard up. He wasn't putting up historic numbers. He was solid, but really it's been kind of bereft of talent. Now, you did bring in Kendrick Bourne, who I think I thought he was no better than a third or fourth type of receiver coming into this year, but he's proven that I think he is a number 2 wide receiver in this league now. I just think he was kind of stuck in San Francisco behind Deebo Samuel, behind Brandon Ayuk, and obviously George Kittle is in my opinion, the best tight end in the league. So he was the fourth, at best, the fourth or fifth option on that team. So I just don't see it's going to happen. I don't see them spending huge money, which pains me to say it because I really want them to get one of those top tier wide receivers. I think you're going to have to kind of fish lower in the pond. I think you're going to have to go after a Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't know what you think about DJ Chark. I think he might have been maybe a 1-year wonder there in Jacksonville. Maybe the market on Mike Williams might kind of get depressed a little bit, so you might be able to get him on the cheap. Is he a true number one? I don't know if he's a true number one, but he's definitely a better upgrade than what you have here. Allen Robinson. I loved Allen Robinson a couple of years ago. He played really well with a really bad quarterback in Mitch Trubisky, but this year I know they had a rookie at quarterback in Justin Fields who got yo-yoed back and forth with Andy Dalton, so that was not a perfect situation, but still a receiver caliber should have put up a more solid season than he did. Like he should have at least put up like 900 yards through the air receiving, but he only had just over 400 yards and a couple touchdowns, so it really wasn't a great season from not Josh Allen, but Allen Robinson. So it's kind of where, obviously, to me, you're going to have to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that pool where you're going to have to try to take a reclamation project a la Juju Smith-Schuster, bring him in, maybe get him on a 1-year deal, something along those lines. Or the one that just kind of cropped up today is Jarvis Landry, which that one I actually like pretty well because he's played in the slot, played on the outside, and he would obviously be your best receiver at this point. And you can bring him in depending on, because if he's a cap casualty from the Browns, if he gets cut, I'd have to see I think it all depends on when he gets cut, if what the salary would be, what you would have to pay him, or if he's just an outright free agent at that point. But if he's an outright free agent, then obviously I'd go right now and I'd sign him once free agency gets here. Because I still think that Jarvis Landry has got something in the tank. I think he's 28, 29 years old. So he's right around that where he still has a couple good years left. He's at the tail end of his prime, but he's still very productive. So I think he'd be a good option to bring in. Now, obviously, like I said, he's not at this point in his career. He's not what he was in Miami as far as putting up like 1,400 yards and this dominant type of slot receiver that could go out and play on the outside as well. But he's still very, very good. His last 1,000-yard season was an 1,100-yard season in 2019. Oh, and I think some of his legs have kind of been saved because Cleveland runs the ball all the time with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So to me, he's still got something left in the tank here. I think the best option for you, for the Patriots to get that number one weapon, and I think unless you get a Chris Godwin or a Devontae Adams, I think honestly the best option would be to go in the draft, get one of these guys like a Jameson Williams who might slide down the boards because of his injury, or if a Drake London is still there in the draft, which I don't think he will be, but if he's there, get him, or a Chris Olave or a Garrett Wilson. If one of that group is there, I'm not as big on the Treylon Burks because to me, Treylon Burks kind of feels like N'Keal Harry 2.0. Jahan Dotson, I don't mind that. I think to me, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyler Lockett, so I wouldn't mind bringing him here. But I would, obviously, out of those four that I mentioned, I would love to have Jameson Williams, obviously, because he's got the Alabama ties. So he and Mac Jones could hit it off and they could have some chemistry there. So that would be interesting to see. But when it comes to so that would be my ideal situation is because you get to keep your money and spend it on JC Jackson. And you would bring in Jameson Williams, where I don't know if he'd be ready for the start of the season. Maybe you get him for the last 8 games, the last somewhere in that last 12, 10, 8 game range, second half of the season. He's ready to go. Maybe since he's younger, maybe he rehabs and he's actually ready to go earlier. So is it a win now move? Maybe not. But at least to me, that's a guy that in Jameson Williams, he's got game breaking speed. He's a good route runner. He is a very polished receiver coming out of Alabama. To me, he'd be perfect, absolutely perfect for this Patriots team. So I would just absolutely love to see them go in the draft and get Jameson Williams. I would love Chris Olave as well. Obviously, Drake London would be a pipe dream because he's kind of like the jack of all trades at receiver. He's a big, tall, strong receiver. He's got good speed, good route runner. So he's that type of number one elite receiver that I think you could go out and get out of USC. So I would love to see him get him, but I don't think he's going to be gone at that point, I think. But after that, to me, Jameson Williams and Chris Olave are the next two that I really, really would love to see the Patriots go out and draft. So to me, I really want to see them actually use their draft picks on that receiving core, at least the first round pick. You get a receiver, or if maybe by luck you see them start to slide down the board and maybe you might be able to trade up in the second round and get one, then do that as well. But you have to, for me, I think the best way to go about this is use that money on JC Jackson, sign him, and go in the draft and sign and draft one of those young receivers, and then maybe take a shot on a DJ Chark, or if a Juju Smith-Schuster is still out there and he's cheap, sign him so that you bolster that receiving core and you push those guys down the depth chart, maybe. But I mean, obviously, you'd have to maybe kind of make some moves around if you did bring in a veteran plus a rookie. I think the best way to go about this would probably if you draft a rookie, you're not going to sign a vet. You're probably not going to sign a veteran because with all the amount that you spent last year. But at least if you kind of got one of those top tier rookies, I would feel pretty good about that. And I know some people say, well, this team is built to win now. They should go out and get one of the veteran ones, which, like I said, if you get a Chris Godwin, you get a Devontae Adams, then yeah, hell, I'm all for it. Or even if what you think about Allen Robinson at this point in his career, or if you get somebody like that or Mike Williams, then yeah, obviously they're ready to go. And that would be the best option. But honestly, at this point, I don't think the Patriots have those financial wherewithal to actually be able to do that. And the one dark horse in this whole thing that, or I shouldn't say dark horse because the Patriots are the second favorites to land him, but the one kind of situation where that could kind of throw this all through a loop would be if they took that first round pick, or maybe they took a second or third round pick and traded it to Atlanta for Calvin Ridley, depending on what the price is. Because it sounds like Calvin Ridley wants to play football again. So he could come back, and Calvin Ridley is still young. This is the end of the rookie deal. So he's 26, 27 years old. So he's still very much in the prime of his career. This is still a young receiver that Mac Jones can grow with. And this is where you could give Calvin Ridley, because I think he's got $11 million come due this year. So maybe you go out and get him. You try to maybe trade Nelson Aguilar to the Falcons or see what financially would work along with along with one of those picks, because I would be okay if you traded your first round pick for a young receiver like Calvin Ridley, who even when Julio Jones was there and Julio Jones was still Julio Jones and ripping things up, you saw Calvin Ridley make a name for himself and was really good. And there were times where this isn't one of those situations where, okay, you have a stud Hall of Famer in Julio Jones where he's going to, obviously he's going to make anybody better no matter what. But this is a situation where you had Julio Jones was still really good, but you had Calvin Ridley, who wasn't just picking up the scraps left over. There were times in the game where in games 3 years ago, where 2-3 years ago, where Calvin Ridley was the number one target in those games, even with a healthy Julio. Calvin Ridley was the number one. He would take over games. So this is a legitimate number one receiver that you could go out and get. It's just a cost. It's just a matter of what your draft capital cost is going to be for him. So that'll be the interesting thing to look at here as we head down the stretch of March into April as we go through the whole free agency and draft season. So that'll be interesting. But that's going to be the one wild card there is, do they go out and get Calvin Ridley? And if you do Calvin Ridley, obviously you're going to take yourself out of the draft. But for me, the two best options to get your number one is trade for Calvin Ridley or draft somebody like a Jameson Williams or Chris Olave. That would be my hope in this case. Now, as we switch gears here to the NBA, the Boston Celtics were on the break, on All-Star break, as we did see Jason Tatum participate and start in the All-Star game for Team LeBron. But we will do a short little look here at the upcoming last third of the season as the Celtics will look to kick things off against the Brooklyn Nets. But the big question here is the Boston Celtics at this point, they went on that long 9-game win streak before it got snapped by the Detroit Pistons right before the All-Star break. They lost 111 to 112 against a putrid Detroit team. But the big thing here, though, for Boston is we are looking in the standings, and they are 6th in the standings. So they really jumped far ahead because at one point in the season, they were hovering around that. Because remember now, the NBA added 2 more playoff seeds as they have that play-in game to get into the play-in game to get into the playoffs. So it's all just lovely. It's ridiculous. So the NBA, but the Celtics with that 6th seed are now they're far away enough from that having to play into that stupid playing game now that things are looking better here for Boston as they are only 4.5 out of first place. And they have, let's see, we're looking at about ballparking here about what, 26, 25, maybe not even that many games. So somewhere in between that, like 17 to 24 games left on the season. So there's still time to catch, maybe get to that 3rd or 4th seed, maybe even that, maybe the 2nd seed. I mean, obviously it's 4.5 games, so that's not a lot to make up, but still, I mean, the Bulls and the Heat are at the top of the conference, but I think at this point, this is where you might see Milwaukee, who's only 2, kind of start to put things in gear. The 76ers could put things into gear and catch and kind of flip-flop here. So I think this is where Boston can make up some room as we head down towards the stretch. But the real question is, now that they have become, in my opinion, a legitimate playoff team with legitimate aspirations of at least winning. I think in this case, I think they can win 2 rounds. Well, I think they can at least win the first round, and I think this is a situation where you have a legitimate opportunity to make it out of that second round, because this isn't one of those years where it's a LeBron in the Cavs, or there's no version of the Golden State Warriors out in the East, because the Brooklyn Nets traded away Harden to the 76ers. They traded away Ben Simmons, who knows what's going to happen with Ben Simmons, if he's going to step foot on the basketball court. And Kyrie may or may not be able to actually play in his home stadium. It sounds like maybe they might be lifting that stupid rule that New York has for Kyrie still having, if he's not vaccinated, that he can't even go play in his own stadium, when away players who can come in and do it, who aren't vaccinated, can come in and play. But honestly, though, none of those teams, the Nets or the 76ers, I don't think any one of those are the Golden State the 2015 through 18 Warriors, 19 Warriors here. I don't think we're in that type of territory where it's an absolute dominant super team. So this is where it feels more open. Of course, you still have to worry about Milwaukee. Milwaukee obviously scares me with Giannis. So I don't, for some reason, I can't take the Heat serious. I know you have Jimmy Butler, who's proved himself in the postseason, but I just don't. There's just something about Jimmy Butler. I mean, there's just something about that Miami team after Jimmy Butler that there's some nice pieces there, but I just can't take them seriously. And I know this is going to sound strange because of the team I'm going to mention next, but when it comes to one of those, should you take them serious, would be the Bulls, because obviously the Bulls are kind of playing with not spare parts, but this wasn't a team that you were like, oh, okay, this is going to be a great team altogether. But they have a decent roster. Basically, it's one of those situations where the sum of all their parts are greater than any individual at this point. And they do have, they did bring in Kyle Lowry from the Toronto, I was going to say Maple Leafs, the Toronto Raptors. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. I actually feel that they're a better team altogether than the Heat are. So I think not Milwaukee, but Chicago could be an actual legitimate contender along with the Nets, with the 76ers, and with Milwaukee. Now, this is where I think the Celtics have thrown their hat into that ring. I don't think they're going to win the NBA title, but I think this is finally where Ime Udoka's message has started to break through this last month or so. This is where we've seen this team rip off 9 wins. And I don't care what you say about the competition that they played. They weren't playing great against bad competition to start the year. So I think finally, this is where they're not playing a lot of the ISO ball. Even Doc Rivers said it, who now is coaching the 76ers. He's the one that said this is not the old Celtics. They're not playing that ISO ball. They're out there playing team basketball. So I think this is where you get to that point with the Celtics where you have to actually buy into this team. And like I said last week, I've taken the cheese on this team. Like I said, I don't think they are an actual legitimate title contender, but I think this is where they have a shot to make some noise here in the East, just because you have Jason Tatum, who looks like he is realizing his full potential here, and seems like he's finally being accepted into that superstar, megastar type of role here, where that looked like he was searching for that. He was searching for the approval, searching for the LeBrons, the KDs, the Antetokounmpos, you name it, that were he was looking for them to say, all right, am I part of the club now? And it seems like a lot of them now have said, all right, you're in the club. So I think this is where, with his confidence of, all right, I'm that guy now, and Jaylen Brown, who to me plays with a chip on his shoulder, but sometimes can forget about it a little bit. But he's playing well. And if you get Marcus Smart back, who's dealing with his injury, and you have Derek White, who you got in that trade, who's been a pretty good piece. You've shortened your bench after getting rid of some of those pieces that Danny Ainge just kind of had dangling around and really didn't do much. So now and then Neesmith is turned into a decent shooter. Grant Williams, surprisingly, who I didn't really want taking a lot of these threes, has been a pretty solid 3-point shooter. So this is to the point where you kind of trim the fat off of this team. This is where I think you have a pretty good shot at making some noise here in the playoffs. And I do think this is a team where you can buy into, where they're actually making progress, and Udoka's finally gutting them playing the way that he wanted to. And it's just come in the nick of time where they can make some noise in the standings. And I think this is where I think you'll see a pretty good postseason coming up here from Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And I think that with the Nets not really being at full strength, and with all the turmoil they have there, and yes, I know they have Kevin Durant, but Kevin Durant can't pull the whole team by himself if he doesn't have Kyrie and doesn't have Ben Simmons there to help him out. So this is where, and with Philadelphia, it's still to be determined how James Harden is going to fit into this. And I know the Celtics crushed the 76ers big time last week before the All-Star break, but obviously they were missing some players. But still, I just don't see that one super team that's going to be standing in the Celtics' way. So I do feel more optimistic than I ever thought I would, because how many podcasts did I come on here and say, oh, same old story, same old Celtics. We're not going to have anything new to talk about come the end of the season. It's going to be that same old story, underachieving Celtics, fighting for 500, fighting for that 10th spot in the playoffs, for that stupid playing game to make it to the playoffs. So it's like I said, I'm a lot more optimistic than I ever thought I would be on this Celtics team where we stand right now. And to their counterparts in the Boston Garden, the Boston Bruins, like I mentioned, they did end up getting Patrice Bergeron back. Brad Marchand was supposed to be coming back for their game here against the Seattle Kraken, but he is going to miss that game for personal reasons. So he's got some personal things he has to tend to. So I don't know how many games he's going to end up missing. And actually, there was a statement released by the Bruins that this just came out today, that Brad Marchand is not participating today in Seattle. He is expected to rejoin the team tomorrow, though. So that did change, because it looked as though he was going to have to miss this game against Seattle, but now he's back. He's going to be back on the ice for the Boston Bruins. So that's going to be some good news here. So this is going to allow Bruce Cassidy to put those lines back together that he had before the suspensions, before everything started to kind of go downhill here for the Bruins. Now, this is where you'll have, I think if Cassidy's smart, he's going to go back to having Marchand and Bergeron on the top line, and then have Pasta and Taylor Hall on that second line. So yet you spread out your scoring, and that worked really well for the Boston Bruins. So, and obviously you're getting other contributions as well. And Jeremy Swayman showed up big time against Colorado. Only gave up the one goal. And as we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Colorado right now is technically the number one overall seed in the West. So that was a huge win for Boston to pull that off against a great team like the like the Colorado Avalanche. And I know we kind of talked about early on that the Boston Bruins kind of went to a little bit of that skid as far as maybe not being where they should be in the standings, and because they had some good momentum. Now they've won 2 in a row. And the thing to remember here is they're at 62 points right now in the standings. So they have a 10-point lead over the Red Wings in the Atlantic. And as far as for the next, and so basically, obviously, with the way the NHL does it, they do the eighth playoff seeds, and then the Blue Jackets are at 53. So basically, Boston is pretty much kind of in cruise. I shouldn't say cruise control, but they're in really, really good shape as we head down the stretch because they've played 50 games, so there's still about 32 left here in the season because the NHL plays 82. So they have the Bruins still have 32 games left. So they still have time to see if they can gain on the Maple Leafs, maybe get into that third spot. I don't know if they're going to be able to catch the Lightning. They're not going to be able to catch the Panthers. They have 75 points. And then maybe when it comes playoff time, you can leapfrog the Capitals and the Rangers, maybe the Penguins and Lightning if you're really lucky, if you really catch fire. But again, they're so far ahead of the Red Wings and so far ahead of the Blue Jackets that they're in pretty good shape as we head down these last 32 games for the Bruins. But getting back to Boston here, this is where it's going to be good. You're getting Marchand back tomorrow in their first ever trip to Seattle, which I'll definitely have to stay up and watch that game because that's going to be definitely entertaining to see. Definitely, hockey is certainly my favorite winter sport. But I'll definitely be interested to see how things go down the stretch. And of course, the NHL hasn't had their trade deadline yet, so it'll be interesting to see what Boston does, what they decide to go after. Now, of course, they could always use some more secondary scoring so that maybe you can bump Pastrnak back up to the first line and get the perfection line back together, get the best line in hockey back together. Or at least maybe if you can't get maybe a second line score, maybe you get some third line scoring depth just to kind of strengthen that out. But honestly, probably as much as I want them to get more scoring, what they really need though is they need some more depth on defense. They obviously with Charlie Coyle and with Brandon Carlo, you have two obviously with McAvoy, he's one of the best all around defensemen in the game. He's turned himself into that. He was a top prospect for a reason, and he's showing it now. And he's earning every penny, and he's earned his way into being one of the best. He's going to be in that Norris conversation for a long time. And obviously, Carlo is a pretty good running mate, and they have Grzelcyk as well. So you have some really good top of the line, three good defensemen right there. But that's where it kind of drops off after that, because you've had Riley Smith, who has been okay, but it's just trying to find some more depth defensively as well for Boston. So it's going to be, I think that's where maybe you try to get a little bit bigger defenseman, because that's just kind of where, at least what I've seen from them over the last couple of years for Boston has been is they've lacked a little bit of size on defense after McAvoy and after Carlo, because after that, I love Matt Grzelcyk, but he's a smaller guy. He is 5'10", 5'9" out there on the ice. And then you have, Miller's not playing, so obviously because Miller retired, so you're kind of you're missing some of the size once you get past McAvoy and Carlo. So I think you do need to kind of get a bigger physical defenseman, and maybe if you can get a bargain bin type of offensive defenseman, get a little bit more from the defense. But I think to me, it's just adding to the depth of the defense is the biggest thing. No matter what you can get for that defense, if you can get some quality, a quality second line defenseman to pair with Carlo or Grzelcyk, depending on how they kind of jumble up those pairs. But really, honestly, though, that's been the big thing. And obviously, we can't go without mentioning this, is that the Bruins traded for the Coyotes defenseman Michael Callahan. So Callahan, who did play for the Providence Friars, is coming back home in a sense here to New England, as they did acquire the defenseman from the Coyotes. So yeah, there we go. There's some depth that the Bruins are going after. But again, I still want them to go after some other, maybe some bigger names here. And as we get towards the NHL trade deadline, we'll definitely look into who they can go after as far as on the defensive line. But this is where, again, obviously the Bruins are the only one that have played any games here over the last week or so, because the NHL has been in their the NBA has been in their All-Star break. But this is where I like what I saw with the Bruins coming off that Avalanche game. I think I think that little skid that they had, which we all kind of thought they'd be heading for after Marchand got suspended and Bergeron hurt himself, that this is where they're definitely in that spot where I don't know how serious of a cup contender they're going to be with Tampa and with the with Tampa and the Panthers really kind of separating themselves here. But I do feel more confident, because there was, over the last couple of weeks here, I thought maybe this could be a direction where you might want to say, all right, maybe we trade some of these veterans like a Bergeron or a Marchand away to try to retool the farm system here to get some more players to go along with last year's first round pick, who's been playing pretty well for Providence. So this could be a situation where maybe Boston is that's where I thought maybe Boston could try to restock the farm system, try to get some prospects in here, try to build for the future, because you already have Poston, McAvoy, and Taylor Hall, who did sign long-term here. So maybe this is where you can try to restock the farm system. But the Bruins, this is where I kind of changed my tune, where they have started to come out of it here. They have looked better. They do have a pretty large lead. So I think this is where, as far as that playoff spot, so they have a pretty good cushion. So this is a veteran team where, and in the end, and Swayman, now that he's pretty much going to, in my opinion, Swayman's probably going to be the 1A, and then you have Linus Ullmark, who's going to be the 1B goaltender. So gone are the days where you have a goaltender starting 56, 60, 65 games a year. But still, this is where I think Swayman is. I think he's developing into year number one. And I think with that win over the Avalanche, that was a big boost. So now that I think I don't think this is as dire as I thought some people were making it out to be, and maybe that I thought maybe over the last couple of weeks or the last month or so or whatever, that I thought it might be for the Bruins. So I do like the direction that they're going in. As far as in the short term here, I do think that they might have a shot to get out of the second round. I think they'll win their first. I don't know if they'll win their second, but I do feel better now that they're getting their players back and that they're healthy, and Bergeron looks pretty good. So I feel pretty good where the Bruins are at right now. Like I said, I don't think that they're any serious cup contender, but I do think that they're in better shape than I thought they were going to be, because I thought they just might be a middling playoff team that might win the first round. They might be a one and done. They might just get that first round and get kicked out. But this is where I do see progress from this team. I do feel better about this team from where they're standing right now. So this will be an interesting stretch to see what the Bruins add to their team, how Cassidy and how Don Sweeney really feel about this team, and if they really think that they can make a strong push in the playoffs. This will be interesting to see what they do. And before we wrap things up here, we'll just kind of mention shortly what's going on with Major League Baseball. As we mentioned, they did meet today for 4 hours, but they haven't come to any decision. So basically at this point, there's no real news. It's just been they're meeting, and they did over this last week set they set a deadline, not artificial, but they set a deadline of February 28th. So that would be next, I believe it's Monday. if I'm correct. If my calendar wants to work here, folks. Let's see. So yes, that would be on Tuesday. So next Tuesday is their deadline to get that deal done. And then today, what they did just come out and say, like about like 6 something, almost 7 o'clock this evening, is that if they don't end up getting a deal done by that February 8th date, then regular season games will start to be postponed, which isn't a shock, but still sucks because we all knew that they were going to have to cut some spring training games, and now it looks. I'm not terribly optimistic that this is going to happen by that date because I know deadlines spur action, but still, this is Major League Baseball and the Players Association, which moves at a glacial pace whenever they have to talk about anything or negotiate anything. So I just don't see them getting anything done by Tuesday, less than a week. I just don't see that happening. They don't have a great track record of being quick, being able to get things done. And even when they are quote unquote held to gunpoint as far as the Players Association, they still take a while, but they end up capitulating to whatever. So at least in the recent years, I'm not saying over the past whatever 50 years, but just recently they've been slow and they haven't focused on trying to quote unquote make the game faster, quicker paced. It's just kind of been all right, money, 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 money. And I mean, on this case, I am more on the player side because of the whole minor league situation as far as them paying their players, which their minor league players, which they're making $12,000 to $14,000 a year. That's not you could barely last half a year on that, if that. That's nothing. That's nothing. That's a penny in the bucket of Major League Baseball, but yet they don't want to pay them. And then they're talking about trying to cut some of these minor league players, which is just stupid. So the baseball is just trying. It's like, oh, it's just so frustrating. It's like, stop killing the momentum that you had last year. You had a great postseason. You made momentum last year. It felt like there were more younger kids at the game, at least at Red Sox games. They had a younger crowd. They were bumping music. It was like being at a nightclub. So you were definitely bringing in the younger generation. So it's just frustrating. I know Boston's going to be a little more isolated. The Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, though the big time markets are going to be isolated. And obviously in St. Louis, but once you kind of get into, you throw in the Milwaukee's, the Cleveland's, Tampa Bay, Toronto, you throw in all those other markets where where there's not all this deep rooted tradition, where you have diehard fans for generations and generations. You're risking killing more of that fan base that you worked at so hard last year, bring back. And I don't know, and it's just frustrating, just because, like I said, I am more on the player side of this, where I think they should get maybe not everything that they're looking for as far as the financial end of it here, but I do like the giving these teams more room on that luxury tax so that you're not absolutely pinched, so that you can afford to bring in other players, so that you're not absolutely screwed and have to trade away a Mookie Betts, or have to trade away, it looks like probably the Nationals are going to have to trade away at some point over the next couple of years, trade away Juan Soto, trade away your superstars, although Soto might be in a different situation because it's a smaller market and whole nother ball game. But anyways, as far as just all the revenue sharing, everything that's kind of going into this, everybody kind of dragging their feet. And obviously once they, I think probably once they kind of get into March here, I think once things really be like, all right, we'd be playing spring training games now. And once you're like, all right, we're a couple weeks away, I think then that's where maybe the players are kind of going to get antsy and break down here, because we're not talking about the pandemic like in 2020, where it was a lot more contentious. But this is a situation where I think you might have some of the players association start to kind of crack here and be like, all right, we want to get back out. Yes, you might miss the first 2 to maybe the first month of the season, and it might start in May. But this is where I think baseball and the Players Association they're going to miss this play. They're going to miss this deadline because I just don't think that's going to happen. But I think probably whatever the March deadline is, probably like that mid-March to like March 20, whatever it might be deadline. This is where I think you might get action and you might have them actually make a move and actually get something done. I'm not going to hold my breath here over the next week that actually anything will happen. But if anything does, we will certainly bring that to you. If that happens next week, is obviously actually that would be the day after their deadline would be for the next podcast. So we'll see how things go for Major League Baseball and Boston Red Sox and all their affiliated clubs and see what happens. And actually kind of a funny thing today, I saw this Instagram post where the Red Sox had at JetBlue all of their team hats, all their team apparel, but because they're in a lockout, you can't sell any of the players' gear, any like jerseys, like a Rafael Devers or Xander Bogaerts or Chris Sale jerseys, because the players are being locked out, so they can't sell any of that. So that just kind of made me laugh, but then it also made me depressed because it means that baseball's still locked out. We're not going to have it. And I desperately want baseball back. I desperately want them. I want to talk about the free agency pool when that opens back up after the lockout ends. I want to talk about any maybe possible last minute trades. I want to get into all that, but baseball and Players Association has just put a big wet blanket over all of that. So hopefully we have news about baseball. Hopefully we have positive news about baseball next week, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Hopefully we do though. So as we wrap things up on this week of the show, we remember next week we will get into more of the Celtics and Bruins as they get back in action post All-Star break for the NBA, and as the Bruins get on their West Coast trip here, as it already started in Colorado and moves to Seattle. And of course, with the New England Patriots, we will update you on anything that goes on in the JC Jackson saga, as that will be we'll get into week number 2 of the salary cap / franchise tag watch. And of course, talk about more of the options that the Patriots have to go on. We've already looked at wide receiver as far as need. Then we'll switch things over. We'll look at the defensive side of the football and their second biggest area of need as far as what they should be looking to upgrade as we move along. And if anything pops off with baseball, we will certainly let you know. And as always, remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. The button should be somewhere around there. You click that bell for the notifications as well. And of course, you can follow me at Sean_Met28 on Instagram or Twitter with that same handle. Or you can follow the show at NE Sports Weekly on Twitter. And send me any questions on any of the platforms, any of the forums here at all. And I will definitely make sure to take a look if you have any questions. And remember, the live stream is always on Wednesday nights unless there's something happening, and I'll let you guys know from 8 p.m. Starting at 8 p.m. So you're always welcome to participate in the live chat. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed this show. Until next week, have a good week, everybody.